So, as you guys know from earlier, my name is Ribeiro. Thank you, Charlie. And I'm here to talk to you guys tonight about forging. Forging static sites with Metalsmith. The concept of static sites is something that's become very popular in the developer community, and it's kind of an important topic to me because as I've been thinking about my growth as a developer, I've been wanting to start writing, because that's one of those ways to, really solidify an idea and say, I understand this because I can effectively communicate it to other people. And I think, for those of you who don't have a blog, I think it's an important thing for every developer to do, and hopefully by the end of tonight's talk, you'll have the tools to go and build one from scratch. That's the goal here. So this is actually my site. It's a little bit minimalistic, but it's kind of what I was going for, at least to get started. You can see I've got a blog roll here. You can go into one of the posts, which, on a side note, I have a post that covers all the information, almost all the information I'm going to be talking about tonight. So in addition to the slides, the code, and the video, you can also check out my site at agilelogic.com and read the post. But we're going to go through a lot of what this covers and talk about how to do it. Let me move over to PowerPoint and get started. So you guys already know about me and title. We're going to basically give you an overview of what we're going to talk about. Why do we even want to do static sites? I mean, everybody's doing dynamic applications, stuff backed by CMSs, databases, complex web servers. Why would we even go this route? We're going to talk about what Metalsmith is then with relation to the static site generator movement, how to get started, how the plugin pipeline for Metalsmith works, what metadata does for us. I'm going to give you guys hopefully we've got enough time, go through a 5-stage demo, give you a few tips, and talk about, as sort of a bonus topic, deployment, so that you guys can deploy the way I deploy the code. So as far as static pages, I'd like to think this is a different way to think about the modern website. We've typically had two ways of thinking about websites. You have the coded by hand, raw HTML, probably something that's easy to learn. You learn, maybe as a teenager or in your 20s, hey, I wrote my first website, hello world. Okay, what do I do now? It doesn't really go anywhere, and every page has to be hand-coded, copy-paste my layout. It's not efficient. The other option is we go the fully dynamic route. You're a web application developer, you have your database, something written in, say Ruby with Rails sitting on top of it, or C# and ASP.NET MVC. There's a lot of then technology that you have to understand, and it's not simple. Another option is just going with CMS. Those don't work for every scenario. What if I want to build small web applications or other things and insert those into the site? Well, now I've got to go learn how the CMS works, whatever language it's coded in. That becomes a pain. WordPress, as many of us at least should know, is a nightmare, and I don't mean nightmare to set up. I'm talking about maintenance and security. It is one of the biggest targets on the internet. Putting your hard work into that, I find that to be a bit of a liability, not to mention if you don't know PHP and you want an add-on, well, now you have to learn PHP. So WordPress is out. So then, what about the issue of traffic? What if you actually have a plan on how to make a high-traffic blog, but you don't want to spend a lot of money on your server? I spend $5 a month on a server. It's got 1 core, ½ gig of RAM, and 20 gigs of hard drive space. I don't want to spend any more than that. So how do we serve, what if I end up on the front page of Reddit or Hacker News one day? I want to serve that traffic, not go down, and still pay $5 a month. That's a lot easier when all you have to do is read a file and serve it right to someone. Even GitHub Pages is doing this concept. If anyone's familiar with Jekyll, Jekyll is a Ruby-based static site generator. If you have set up a repo for GitHub Pages, that's what they're doing in the background. And like I've said before, what if you need dynamic content? I alluded to that with the CMS thing. If we pair this with Nginx or some other web server, we can use that as a reverse proxy and set up other pieces of dynamic content behind the scenes, serve our static files directly, and then go ahead and do microservices or even one single monolithic dynamic application to do all of our dynamic stuff. You can also do stuff. My site does comments through Discuss. That's completely off-site. You just put a little bit of script, a script tag with their snippet in it in your page, and voila, you've got comments. You had to do 5 minutes of work, and most of that was signing up for the service. So there's a lot of ways that we can get away from heavy frameworks, database access, all of this extra stuff, just simply to have a blog and an about me. So it's one of the reasons why I like it. It's also very hands-on. So Metalsmith is a Node.js based static site generator. The quote from the tagline from their site is an extremely simple, pluggable static site generator. It uses a plugin system that powers build pipeline. But is anyone here familiar with Gulp? A couple people. How about Express? So if you're familiar with how Gulp works, it's almost exactly the same idea. You start a pipeline, or if you've ever done stuff like for those who are like C# developers, doing chains of method chains with link. It's the same kind of concept. You're basically just saying, I'm going to start with this collection of files, and I'm going to run it through all of these methods, and the methods happen to be plugins. So you just inject a bunch of plugins, and at the end you say, okay, now run it. And it just runs through, and it does all of it. You can do this either through code or through a JSON config file. The config file method, from what I can gather from it, seems to be limited. If you were doing, you could do most of what I'm going to do tonight with that, but there's a couple of steps that I think would become challenging, if not impossible. So I prefer the code method, and that's what we're going to explore tonight. And you can also use this to build much, much more. You could take your blog posts, and if you had the right plugins, the right setup, generate an ebook, generate technical documents. It's not just for building a website, but that is easily, it's one of its primary purposes, and one of the things that you're going to find the most information out there on the web about. So starting a Metalsmith project, you need to install Node. For those of you who are familiar with the Node community a lot, and you're familiar with what IUJS is, it is IUJS compatible. That's how I'm running it on my server. If you don't know what IUJS is, that's okay. You can go ahead and use regular Node. Setup, to get started with a Metalsmith project, just call npm init, so that'll walk you through some steps to get your package.json file going, set up a little information about your project, and then npm install -- save Metalsmith. That will go ahead and pull down the Metalsmith package from the npm repository and save it into your package.json so that it's there for later. I'm going to be talking about plugins throughout this talk. Any of the plugins, you do the same thing, just Metalsmith - and then the rest of the plugin name to install each of those plugins. I'm not going to be focusing very heavily on this part of the process, so I want to make sure I get that out of the way early. File structure then, we're going to make 2 directories, source and templates, and then also generate a file called build.js. These are just empty so that we can get down to directory structure. Node modules, this is standard for any Node project. If your npm installed libraries go here, that's where Metalsmith's going to live, that's where your plugins live. If you're source controlling this, and if you're not familiar with Node.js, you don't usually want to source control this folder, as it's much larger than the rest of your project. Once when you pull down your repo on a fresh computer, just go ahead and run your npm install, and it'll go ahead and grab your packages from the web. Build is your output directory. So this is the result of processing your source directory through the plugin pipeline. Another way of thinking about this is the directory you would want to serve to your users as your website. So build is your root directory. Source then is where we're going to actually do most of our file editing. If you're building a blog, this is where your posts are going to go, your homepage is going to go. It's also going to have your JavaScript, your CSS, your images. It's also, I also mentioned here, .md, that's Markdown. Markdown is a templating, actually template's wrong, right? It's sort of Markdown is a markup-like language allowing you to write HTML in plain text. It makes certain assumptions about every time you have a chunk of text separated from another chunk of text by at least one line, those are separate paragraphs. It makes it really easy to do HTML formatting. It's great for writing blog posts. So we're going to see some Markdown tonight. That's one of our primary plugins. Templates then is how we're going to give overall structure to these Markdown documents. Tonight we're going to be using Jade, which is a white space sensitive templating language that turns into HTML. You'll notice there are no end tags. So every time you tab in, everything that's farther in is considered inside of that tag. It auto-completes the tags, things like that. You'll see some examples of, I've got at least one example of some Jade in the presentation as well. Build.js, this is essentially your build pipeline defined in here. And then package.json, this is your npm config, stores what's going in the node modules directory. Core functions, first thing you call is the Metalsmith function. It is not a constructor in the typical JavaScript sense. You don't have to call new in front of it. And then you pass it __dir name. That's a node constant that is the directory in which the current running script lives. So that's your build.js directory. This returns your Metalsmith object for starting your method chain. So from there, we're going to be calling things like metadata source, destination, and use just in a chain. Whatever comes back from one of them, call another function on it. So metadata allows us to add additional metadata properties to all of the files. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that metadata is used for. One of the things I use this for is to go ahead and implant the URL of the site, my site title, so that I want to use on the top of every page. This is a great way to just spread that into every file. Source, we're going to go ahead and using the directory structure I mentioned, we're going to use /source or /src, and then destination /build. That just sets your source and output directories. I believe these are the defaults, but I like to make it explicit. And then use is the plugin, or sorry, is the function you're going to use the most, because each time you want to register a plugin in order into the pipeline, you're going to pass the plugin. So we do that through use. And finally, we terminate the whole thing with build at the very end. This triggers the whole build process. So all those plugins that have been registered through use, those all get fired in order on the collection of files that's in your source directory. You'll notice that this takes, I put CB, I should have typed it out as callback. This callback takes an error parameter, so you can then effectively at the end of the build chain output errors or a thumbs up, your build pipeline succeeded kind of message. Metadata is useful for templating, grouping, sorting. One of the examples we're going to see in terms of this is we're going to group our blog posts into a collection, and then we're going to use that to iterate over it so that we can have a blog roll kind of page like I showed you on the root of my website. You'll be able to actually see all of your posts with a single paragraph excerpt, that kind of thing. So being able to have access to that metadata, that's how we're going to do those kinds of collection iterating and things like that inside the templates. If you need additional information in a file, you use what they call front matter. It's set up in a YAML kind of format. Think of this, if this looks a little odd to you, this essentially becomes part of a JavaScript object. So this is property value, property value, property value. It's just 3 dashes at the top and bottom, and then your property colon and whatever the value is going to be. So for this example here, this is just basically the front matter from a blog post. Anything that's in your source directory can have one of these at the top of it, and it'll get sucked up into the engine as you go through and process those files. So the overall goal of the pipeline is to copy files from the source directory to the destination directory, having passed it through all of the processing steps of the plugin pipeline. We've talked about user ID, that does all the magic, and metadata is available for each file during the entire processing pipeline. And one of the key things to think about here also is that plugins may add, modify, or remove metadata. So that's one of the reasons why you want to pass things through these plugins, is to be able to add and remove metadata, and then other plugins will act on that metadata that's been added, or usually, most of the time, you're going to be adding or modifying that stuff. So the plugins we're going to be working with tonight, Metalsmith branch allows us to do conditionals. We'll be able to say, if the path looks like this, do this thing, and if the path doesn't look like this, go do something else. Collections, we're going to use that to create essentially our blog roll. Excerpts is going to allow us to extract the first paragraph in the HTML document and go ahead and pass that. Ooh, I forgot the name on here. Sorry, that should be 2 points. So it extracts the first paragraph. Metalsmith Markdown allows us to process Markdown files to HTML. Permalinks allows us to do things like this. When you have projects.md, for example, and Markdown processes that to projects.html. Most people's websites nowadays do nice things like you have a route that ends like this, you have projects/. What you can do then is passing projects.html through permalinks actually makes projects/index.html. Any nice web server is going to go ahead and allow you to have some sort of directive to tell it, hey, if someone comes to just to a directory, go ahead and serve them the index page. Permalinks allows you to go ahead and have those nice looking URLs, even though we're just serving static files. Serve and watch go kind of together. Serve is your development web server, so you can actually do local viewing through localhost. And watch actually will watch the source directory and automatically reveal changed files. And finally, templates allows you to process templates. It actually is capable of processing many different template languages. Like I mentioned before, we're going to be using Jade. And let's go to a demo. If I can find the right button. No, this is going to be good. So, I'd originally hoped to side-by-side this, but make sure we're on the right branch. So, let's go ahead and take a look at what we've got here. This is just getting started. You'll notice that I don't even have a source or build directory here. This is just to give you an idea of what the bare bones structure looks like. We're requiring Metalsmith in, so we have it. We go ahead and initiate it. We go ahead and pass a little bit of metadata in, which we're using my site as an example. So my title is just going to be agilelogic.com. My URL, https://agilelogic.com. Setting our source and destination directories, and then going ahead and executing our build function. If we have an error, we're going to go and log that out to the console so we can see what it is. And if we succeed, site build. So there's not much else we can do with this, because if I go ahead and build, there is no directory to work with. Let's go ahead and actually, we shouldn't even need to do that. So went ahead and built it. You can see at the bottom down here, site build completed. If we go back up, you'll see that I have a source directory. You'll notice that there's no build directory. Your build directory will actually get wiped out every time that you run the build. So if you put anything in there by hand, don't count on it. You should put things in. You should be putting things into source. We have a chance at the end. I'm going to talk a bit about how to pull from multiple sources, but we'll see if we've got time to do that. So that's just bare bones. Let's go to step 2. So by the magic of Git, I now have code. So this is gonna be just a bare bones, like, hey, we can actually put out an HTML file that started out as Markdown. So we've got Markdown, we've got templates. Went ahead and threw in Moment here. It's a date time library that's super useful You'll see it, I'm going to use it in the templates process dates. Again, metadata, set up Metalsmith metadata, source destination, use Markdown. You'll notice that we don't just pass it to there. We actually, the way that the Metalsmith style works is you actually invoke your plugin function or plugin, you invoke it as you go in. The reason being is that's how we can then pass parameters and options into that. So you'll notice with templates, I'm telling it it's Jade and giving it moment. We can add, the nice thing here is we can, with templates, we can add whatever we want in there. And then those objects are going to actually be passed into our templates for use there. So it allows you for some really powerful dynamic templating here. And then finally we build, let's see here, did I put anything in here? Yes. So we do have a test post here. All right, site build completed. Now we don't have any sort of server set up yet, so we're not going to view it, but I can prove to you now that I actually have some stuff in here. Let's go ahead and take a look before we go through that, so we understand what happened. Let's look at the test post. We should have text that says this is just a test. Title, it says test post, an author, and a publish date of today. Our post.jade inserts itself in main into layout. We should have something with a title, an author, and then moment processes my publish date into month, day, and year format, and then the contents inserted. So let's take a look at layout. And we should have a header that has our title, and as well as if there is a title defined, not site title, but if there's a title defined, we'll go ahead and append that to the beginning, if not just the site title. And then we have our main in there. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that actually output. We've got the header, there's that title, title plus site title. And there's my name, there's our title, there's the publish date, and our content. So the proven basic idea, we can actually take Markdown, some templates, and generate real HTML. Simple enough, right? Keep wanting to branch, what I mean to check out. All right. Do the magic. Get. We have code. So let me go back up to the top here. We now have serve and watch. This stage, we're just going to be looking at how we can do development in a more real cycle. I want to be able to actually go view this in a web browser, come back, write some code, go view it in the web browser. Even better if I can be working on my post and then have it live update. So we're going to go ahead and first see, we've got all the same stuff from before. You'll see that in between templates and build, I've inserted this. Serve goes first so that we can actually start serving, and then we do watch. You'll notice the pattern here. This is any directory, any file. Live reload is marked as true, but I'm going to show you that it doesn't work at first. I learned this the hard way, okay? I'm doing you a favor by showing you this the pounded in your brain because I learned this one really hard way. I wondered why does live reload not work? And then I read the docs. Always read the docs. Except when there are no docs, then go read the code. So we're going to be on port 8080 on localhost, and we're going to get live reload eventually, but let's go ahead and build. And let me go ahead and make this full screen. Oh, there it is, localhost. Nope, that is not a file here, actually. I lied. Hold on. Oh, it's just test post. Okay, sorry. I forgot what I had available here. No. Sorry. There's our post. This is what we were hoping to see before, but we didn't have a server to serve it. So we now have this, and sadly, we do not have any sort of reload, because if I do that and save, it's still showing us this. If I reload, we have that. So it's reprocessing it, but we're not getting it right away. Well, let's go ahead and fix that. So I put in our layout jade this script tag. Very important. This is even in my tips slide. That's how important it is, because I learned this like a couple days ago. It killed me that I didn't realize this. So the script tag, threw it at the bottom of the body because that's best. That's what's optimal for things like page speed. But this will then go ahead and insert off out of our watch plugin the correct script. So now we should have this. Let's save. Let's go ahead. This is one thing I'll point out. If you're editing your templates, you have to rebuild. The watch plugin currently only works on the source directory. So keep that in mind. You're still going to have to do rebuilds. So Control C, up enter. Got really used to doing that. All right, so we have this live reload should be working. Oops. And we want to look at this. Look at that. Live reload works. So, important lesson learned. Make sure you include the script for live reload. It's magic, but it's not that magic. Oops. Through the magic of Git, we have code. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at what we've done this time. So you'll notice I've got a bunch of stuff I've added in the middle here. We now have excerpts, which, as I mentioned, that's going to rip off that first paragraph of our post and go ahead and stick it elsewhere where we can get to it in the metadata. We're going to have collections, so anything that's in our posts directory, which you'll notice our site structure has changed a little bit. Talk about that in a second. Anything that's in our posts directory is going to go ahead and get organized by publish date, in reverse, so we're going to have newest posts first. And then we're going to go ahead and do a little bit of branching. So anything that's in that is in posts, we want to go ahead and make its URL based on the title, not the file name. That way I can have garbage file names and have really nice long post titles, and it's all going to work. Oh, hey. We're learning all kinds of things tonight. Better now than after it actually died. There we go. All right. So then my next branch is not posts. The reason I want to do this is because I do still want to do permalinks, but I also don't want to do it on index, because this is one thing to keep in mind. At the root of your site, you will want an index.html, or else when someone goes to, for my example, AzureLogic.com, they're going to get nothing. So you need an index.html there. Everything else we want to go ahead and have reformatted with whatever our file name, or in this case, our permalink for a post. We want to have that at that URL / index.html. So we specially format posts. We specially choose what to do with index. And there, we're just going to go ahead and we're saying not posts, not index. Go ahead and just use permalinks like normal. And everything else looks like is the same. Looking over here at our structure, so if we are correct, we should end up with an index.html, a posts directory with an index.html in it, and then a set of posts in there, including which should be test -post as a directory, test post as a directory with an index.html inside that, if we're correct. Let's go ahead and take a look. Everything is as expected. Let's go ahead and go to root. There's my blog roll. There's my excerpt. I've got a link. We'll go ahead and take a quick look at the template just so you guys can see what I've done here. Click on that. Takes me to my post. We have nice URLs at the top. Everything works the way we expected. We even have one at posts that does the same exact thing. So I didn't lie, everything works the way I said, right? Cool. So let's go ahead and talk about our templates a little bit. Inadvertently, you're getting a small primer of Jade and templating. Bonus content, right, guys? So post hasn't changed very much. Go ahead and skip that. All right. Posts. So this is where that metadata comes in really handy. So we're going to be able to say if collections has been used and we made a collection in there called posts, and if that collection has anything in it, go ahead and iterate over the posts and make me a link to the /post path, which is a variable generated. That is a variable generated by Metalsmith, and then make the text for that link the post title, and go ahead and stick the post excerpt below that. If there isn't anything, that must have been debugging code from way back when. There ain't no posts here, man. So if I go ahead and let's just say I move this out here real quick. We'll build this in a second. Just to highlight, one other thing we should highlight is this template here. This is important at the top. This tells Metalsmith, or in particular the templates plugin, which template to go grab. So post here, whereas posts uses my posts template. So that's why we get different formatting on each of those pages. So we went ahead and moved that one page. So we should have an empty posts, 0, there ain't no post here, man. So everything works like I said. Go ahead and kill this. Reset so that it'll actually let me change branches. And as you know, through the magic of Git, we have code. All right, so this is some of the stuff that I actually don't cover. Everything that you've seen so far, a lot of these samples are actually written straight out of the blog post. So if you want to review it in a more properly written for reading consumption format, you can go read the post. But this is bonus content because you came and showed up or you're watching the video. So we're going to go ahead and add a few more things in here. Those are going to be feed, word count, and sitemap. I'm going to find them from here. So word count, if you notice on my site at the bottom of one of my posts, you can actually see how many words and how long approximately it should take you to read if you read at up to 300 words per minute, which I should probably lower it because we're doing technical posts. It's a little, you want to slow down and actually comprehend a little more. We also want to, for the point of, let's say, if we want to build a serious blog, we want people to come back, or we want them to at least follow us, we want to go ahead and give them an RSS feed. So we can go ahead and generate that. And we want to get Google to go ahead and crawl us and do it correctly, so we want to feed them the sitemap. So we can start doing a little bit of SEO here. So that's what these 3 plugins are going to do. We go ahead and set the variable name for the word count. We set the reading time, variable name. We tell it how it should calculate that reading time in words per minute. 300 is the suggested default feed. I don't want to give them my entire site in an RSS feed. If I go ahead and modify my about page, or if I start, if I add a family photos page, people aren't coming here to go see my family photos. They want to come here and read my technical posts. At least if any of you do. I don't know about anybody else. And then sitemap. We want to go ahead and set the file name that it outputs, the URL property. So again, that path that we used for generating our links earlier, that's the same property that we're going to go ahead and use to feed it where it can grab the link to give to Google or other search engines. Our host name, which and then defaults, priority, and change frequency. There are variables that you put in there. I put daily, that way I'd rather have Google crawl me more often than less often, just in case I do updates and things like that. So that's how those work. Another thing we put in here is additional inclusion. So this technique allows me to exclude our development web server in production. So if you noticed at the very top, there we go. This whole chain gets returned into site build. Now, basically what that allows me to do is I can pause execution of the chain and start doing interesting things. Actually, I shouldn't say pause execution of the chain, pause setting up the chain. The chain doesn't actually execute until we hit build, so we can do interesting things like this. We can store the result of the chain setup so far into site build, and then we can go down here and say, if we are not in production, go ahead and populate, or go ahead and chain a few more methods onto site build and save the result of this back into site build. And then, either way, whether we added those or not, go ahead and execute our build. That makes sense to everyone? So in this case, we should still see it. I don't have that node environment variable set up, which, on a side note, Node imports all of your environment variables from your terminal that you run it into here. So all you have to do is set this up as a regular environment variable, and you should be able to have that. So if you're familiar with doing that, that's all we have to do. And so we're going to be looking for the fact that the server still works, even though I've excluded production. We want to see word count, and we want to see the feed and the sitemap, just so we have an idea of what this, oops, not that one, sorry. So you'll notice I went ahead and included word count and reading time into our template. Let's node build. Let's take a look at our output directory. There's our rss.xml. There's our sitemap with our, actually we've accidentally included our blog role in there, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. If you really want to get particular, you'll want to find a way to exclude that. Should probably go fix that myself. Not everything's perfect. It's a work in progress. That's what we call it, development. Anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at the site. Our test post is back. 5 words, 1 minute. That counts up correctly, so it worked. Let's go ahead and go back to our presentation. So, one thing I have not mentioned is with Metalsmith templates does not include all the templating engines with it. One thing we did not go over is as I jumped between those branches, I did not install any of those Metalsmith plugins through npm. Any one of those that you add, you have to go through that process. npm install -- save package name. So make sure you're doing that. One of the things you need to do as far as template engine goes is, besides installing Metalsmith templates, you need to install. You still need to install your template engine. So in the case of our example, that was installing Jade. Also showed you guys how to use process environment Node.js to set up your environment and control what plugins are in the pipeline, what scripts are included. Actually, I didn't show you how to do it with scripts. That same, you can pass these same variables. Actually, it may even be available already inside of, I believe it's actually already available. You don't even have to pass it. So you can access process.m.nodem inside of your templates. So you can conditionally include scripts like live reload. You can conditionally choose to try to include that in your templates, which makes it's really powerful because you can start to do conditional things there. Remember to, one more time, remember to include your live reload script. I've included the line of Jade required to go ahead and do that. And permalinks, like I mentioned before, work well with a properly configured Nginx directive. This is basically what it looks like inside. Gosh, I'm going to lose what I'm trying to think. I believe it's inside your server block, if you're familiar with Nginx. inside your server block, or even inside of a specific location block, you can go ahead and include the index directive and tell it that it can try to target index.html or index.htm. I'd love to talk more about Nginx, but that is literally a whole other talk. Those of you who are familiar with it, whole other talk. We're not going to go there. As a bonus, I'd like to talk about deployment because we still have a few minutes left. Codeship.com is a really, really cool tool for deployment. I learned about it through some podcasts. I think they were advertising on there. Basically, the idea is all of my code goes into a Bitbucket repo. So I go ahead and commit everything in there. I push to origin master. And what I did with Codeship is I said, hey, you guys go ahead and watch my Bitbucket repo. And whatever I push to master, I want you to execute the custom script. That custom script, now they're actually set up to not only do this kind of thing, but they can also run tests for you and then only deploy if your tests pass. This is because of the nature of the build pipeline, and it's basically do X things. It's not one of those things that is as testable. There's not a lot of business logic actually happening here. It's just go ahead and copy files and transform them. So the testing in this is a little bit odd, but I went ahead and said skip the test step, go ahead and just go to my server, SSH into my server, and run this command. And so on the server then, actually I keep, the fun fact is I keep this deploy script then stored in my repo so that it actually gets deployed with it. But basically we just go ahead, pull our changes, set the node environment variable to production, and run build. If you have other complex services to kick off there, if you want to run something in Rails or something like that, go ahead and do that as well. If you need to pull other repos, do anything else, this works magic. One of the other things actually I should have mentioned in here is that you can even run npm install or npm update, so it can even pull in any new packages that you've added to your package.json. This thing essentially can fully automate your deployments. All you have to do, write code, check, commit it, push it, check your site a couple minutes later, and it's already there. So that's kind of the workflow. Your web server takes care of the rest. You could even set this up if you wanted to have, millisecond level downtime. You could you could set your web server to target a production directory and have Metalsmith, yeah, the thing I'm talking about, Metalsmith build into a staging directory and then have like a swap or a copy that, on the local, on your OS, that should take, half a second at best, or at worst. So you could get down into the milliseconds in terms of that. Even then, you saw how fast that Metalsmith build goes. So, at worst, you're looking at, 2 to 5 seconds of downtime, which on a personal blog shouldn't be a big deal, unless you happen to be serving traffic from a big, unless you make it on the front page of Reddit or Hacker News, you should be okay with a couple seconds of downtime on your personal blog. If you end up just deploying this in a production app for a client or for work, then yeah, I would do some more diligence in how you deploy. Do we have questions, or should I go ahead and show you how we can do multiple, show you kind of where we would do multiple pipelines? Are there questions? I want to do that first, because it is not something I planned, but I have like 5 minutes before we technically wrapping up. Anybody? Bueller? No? Okay.
We know you want to do it.
I do, but I really want to answer questions because I want people to be able to go home and do this if they have the desire to do it. I don't have everything set up to do this. Like I said, I did not think I wasn't sure we were going to get to step 5 because I wasn't sure how much it was actually going to dig deep into the code. So one of the things you can, like I said, when you I believe it actually happens when you instantiate, when you run this Metalsmith function, it blows away your build directory. So if you're doing that, it can become difficult. Like the key example here is anybody familiar with Bower? Bower is like NPM or any other package manager, but Bower is designed for front-end packages. So one of the things we didn't talk about at all here was styling. let's say you want to pull in Bootstrap or UIKit or something else. You want to pull in your jQuery and you want to do all that in the same fashion that you deal with your NPM packages. That's what Bower is for. You tell it it has a config file of its own. I believe it's bower.json if I remember correctly. But anyway, it's set up the same way. It registers your packages in there with versions and all that good stuff. So what we want to be able to do though is, like that node modules directory, there is I forgot, for the life of me I can't remember what it's called. Bower has its own directory though of components, but that's outside of your source directory. So we can't copy, when we're doing our build pipeline, we're no longer able to access any of those things and copy them into our output directory. So what I ended up doing to solve this is inside the build directory right here, if you're successful here, you can set up a whole other pipeline inside of this. And if you you can set up one with 0 plugins, and it will just copy from whatever you designate the source directory to wherever you designate the output directory. So what I did is I designed one that was just Metalsmith. I called the Metalsmith. I called the source. I called the destination. Source was the Bower directory essentially, and destination was something like build.lib or /lib, so that I could at least, this is something that I have designed not to be part of my source tree. I'll never put a lib directory in there. That way, this is actually wouldn't matter anyway unless I flew away. I had 2 files with the same exact name. So you can go ahead and have that, and then when you're referencing your scripts that come out of Bower, you would, or CSS files, things like that, you would reference /lib instead of /cs. You had in your source directory /css or /js. You would reference /build, and then the rest of the tree inside of that Bower directory. I know this is a little abstract because I don't have the code to show it, but that's how I solved the problem of being able to use Bower alongside Metalsmith and actually output all of the nice libraries that I picked out. So, okay, we still have 3 minutes left for questions.
Can you build a destination to like a CDN? Can you put it like in CloudFront, or would that just be something you build it and then maybe do that?
I would probably do that as a step afterwards. I don't know. That'd be something. I would, if nothing else, I would explore the docs and stuff, because this only, as far as I know, this only takes a string parameter.
Like static.
Yeah, I don't think you can. If you maybe set up like a fuse file system kind of thing, where underneath underneath it, it's actually authenticating to a network. Yeah, maybe you can get away with that. But if you haven't set up something like that, then I would expect to go in
another step at the end.
But again, if you have if that's where something like CodeShip comes in, you just check it and push it, and that way, if you're running it, if you're running it locally, you want to be able to run this and test and make sure that you don't accidentally do something wrong. It's nice to have an isolated environment where this is totally safe. And then the only time that something deploys is when you consciously type git push origin master. So anybody? No? So if you don't have a blog, I encourage you to go home, take some of this, and build something of your own. For me, it was extremely rewarding. I wanted to originally build my own CMS, and I don't have the kind of time to build that level of infrastructure. This was something I cooked up, in my nights and weekends over the course of a couple of weeks, and I'm extremely happy with what it's put out. I like the workflow. I like the fact that, among other things, my blog posts are all version controlled. They're all stored in Bitbucket. I've got them on my hard drive, in Bitbucket, and on my production server. That's a good amount of redundancy. I don't have to worry about what's going to happen if my server exploded. Did I back up my database? No worries. So, let's see here. One more slide. No. Oh, 2 more slides. I'm going to go ahead and post the slides. I'm going to try and get right now the code's in a private repo, all my sample code, but I'm going to try and get that on GitHub for you guys, as well as the video, and I think that's pretty much all the resources you guys need. Oh, and I'll the actual original blog post. But here's information about like Jade is a whole rich template language in itself. Spend some time in that. Markdown syntax. You can also enable GitHub flavored Markdown. That's my warning that I'm done. Thank you. Feel free to follow me on Twitter. Check out my website. That's all I got.